So welcome everybody to our virtual panel this morning, Regional Integration and European Latin American Relations under the Impact of COVID-19. We have the great pleasure to have Dr. Joaquín Roy, my friend and colleague and mentor from the University of Miami with us, and I'll introduce him in a second more, but I just want to welcome all of you. I also want to thank all the co-sponsoring entities, including the European Union Center at the University of Miami, and of course, our major sponsor, the European Commission, which finances our Jean Monnet Center of Excellence grant. Today, we have a lot to talk about. We end at 12:15, and our main speaker, which I'll introduce in a second, will be Joaquín Roy, and he'll have a presentation we'll talk about for about half an hour, and then afterwards, I would encourage you, please, to ask any questions via the chat box. So on the bottom where you see the chat box, you can type in your question. Please, if you can, also add your affiliation. So what are we going to talk about in the next hour and 15 minutes? European Latin American relations are one of the strongest ones, I would say, as a non-expert in the region, minus the US. But as we know, the transatlantic relationships have become frayed as well. Right now, there are lots of moving pieces in European Union Latin American relations, and hopefully we'll learn a lot more about these. Institutionally, just to let you know that we have since 2019 a new European Commission who is actively engaged to have the so-called European Union Mercosur trade agreement negotiations being concluded. So I'm sure we're going to talk about that in a little bit. And we have also the European Union Foreign Minister, or the High Representative for Foreign Affairs and Security Policy, Josep Borrell, who, as a Spaniard or Catalan, as far as I know, is much more able to more easily forge good relations with Latin American countries. And then in Latin America, of course, we have, on the one hand, as you know, everybody knows, the US elections next week, which will one way or another impact on hemispheric relations as well as on the European Union. We have the continued split on the Latin American continent between center-left and center-right governments and, their antagonisms. We have noticed the Venezuelan refugee crisis, which is basically the continental refugee crisis that parallels with what has been going on in Europe in the past years. And we've seen repeated attempts by Latin America to create sub-regional organizations, right? CELAC, ALBA, UNASUR, Mercosur, the Andean Community, and so on and so on, which, there's the question like how stable are these? So what does this all mean for contemporary bilateral relations and future bilateral relations between the European Union and Latin America? For all that, there's no better person for us to explain that than Professor Joaquín Roy. Joaquín Roy is a Jean Monnet professor ad personam. That's the highest level that you can get as a Jean Monnet professor of European integration at the University of Miami. He is also the director of the University of Miami's European Union Center. And he used to be formerly the co-director of our joint FIU-UM Jean Monnet Center of Excellence. He's also, of course, a valued collaborator and a true staunch opponent of the European Union. Joaquín Roy received his law degree from the University of Barcelona and his doctorate from Georgetown University. He was previously teaching at the School of International Studies at Johns Hopkins University and Emory University. His research areas are the history of political ideas, Latin American thought, contemporary ideologies, of course, regional integration in the European Union, Latin America, and elsewhere, and human rights policies. Dr. Roy has published over 200 academic articles and reviews, and he is the author or editor, co-editor of over 35 books. Among them, Cuba, the US, and the Helms-Burton Doctrine, published with the University of Florida Press in 2000, the European Union and Regional Integration from the Miami EU Center in 2005, a historical dictionary on the European Union with Roman and Littlefield in 2006, and more recently, a new transatlantic a new Atlantic community, the EU, US, and Latin America, so that triangle. He has published over 1,700 columns and essays in newspapers and magazines, and has received the Encomienda of the Order of Merit bestowed by King Juan Carlos of Spain. So thank you very much, Joaquín, for being here. And we look forward to hearing you talk. And Professor Roy will then talk for about half an hour. And then following that, we will have a Q&A session. So please don't forget, as you have questions, type them in the chat box that you'll find on the bottom of your screen. Thank you very much for coming, everyone. And it's all yours.
Okay.
Professor Roy.
Thank you, Professor Thiel, Markus. It's a great pleasure for me, as you know very well personally, because I had the honor of working with you for some years at the University of Miami. You becoming one of the best, most, graduates of our program.
Thank you.
And don't feel that you are so great anyway. I usually say this, but all the recent graduates of my program anyway. But it shows that we managed to cooperate. And thank you for this undeserved introduction. But I have a minor complaint about this. I always am afraid about those introductions because people picked up data, from webs, etc. Even asking the person for a document, and they always forget, the degree or the diploma that actually I'm most proud of, and actually cost me more time and travel to get it. I have a soccer coaching degree.
Sorry, forgot that.
Sort of a master's degree that I went through 2 years at night in order to, you understand, in order to become a soccer coach anyway, which I have some hope. That's why, for example, I go back very often to my native town, Barcelona, not this summer, okay, because very well, that the best team in the world, Barca, actually, they are sometimes in trouble, and they are looking for a new job. So that's why I go there, go around the stadium. I have an apartment not far, but unfortunately, I come back to the United States to teach and not to be a soccer coach anyway. But it is a good pleasure. But I going into the subject, that you realize that that would be a more example of my humble correction to the constant title of lectures and programs labeled, transatlantic relations. And I cannot resist, all the time, to simply say, I'm sorry, but transatlantic relations without including Latin America and the Caribbean is incomplete. You only have to have a simple linguistic and etymological knowledge of that word, but that's the way it is in the setting of the United States Monnet chairs and centers anyway. But it has been very good for us, by the way, because adding that dimension or triangular dimension, it has been very good for us. We are basically the only center or John Monnet chair in the United States dealing with that dimension. Also, some other people, they do it peripherally, but it has become, a center piece of for us, or at least myself. And the main reason for it is because I believe when we started, with that the Latin American area, Caribbean area, is the one ideal area in the world in order to receive the influence, the inspiration, whatever you wanted to call it, for one of the most important messages of the European Union, regional integration. And the problem has been that the expectations for the adoption that so-called model of point of reference has not been that good until now. But, you know, we will persist in that area. Why, in any case of regional cooperation, of integration, the EU always comes to the picture? Why not an example of a working federation? Why not a reasonable, effective international organization? Why most of experiments seem to imitate, some imitate one EU dimension? Why the EU then is despised, you know, sometimes internationally and even internally in Europe? Why is that? In concrete, the Latin American questions will be why the Latin American systems of integration lag so much behind the point of reference or the model offered by the European Union. Why is it that there is a recurring contrast, you know, between official declarations that for the last quarter of a century, decades, you know, they have claimed to pursue the goal of integration similar to the EU? What Latin American leaders, for example, they mean when they declare, A, that the region needs its own model of integration, sidelining the influence of the president? The answers: the main obstacle, in my view, for mirroring the model of the EU is posed by the unfinished task of consolidating national identity. And without national identity, you cannot have regional identity. Is the production, that topic, national identity, was the production of a unique Latin American species, the pensadores, the thinkers. For most of them, national integration has taken precedent over continental cohesion. That was one of the founders, President Domingo Sarmiento of Argentina, you know, claiming, you know, admiration for the United States. And then dealing with the notions of states and nations, the question then is, often that we hear, what the problem in the region, the problem with some countries around the world is that the problem of failed states. My view, modest view, is that what has failed is the nation, not only the state. The state has been functioning very well, you know, with courts, armies, etc. The liberal nation, not the ethnic nation, has been the model since the very beginning in Latin America. The model coming, you know, from the model of the United States. The liberal nation, ironically, is easy to be designed, but it is expensive. It has to deliver, okay? And then the problem then is that the citizens of a given country ask, when the country went wrong. That comes, you know, from a sentence, a statement, preferred, you know, by a minor, a character of one of the most important novels that of Mario Vargas Llosa, the Peruvian Nobel Prize. That in the novel Conversation en la Catedral, Conversation in the Cathedral, that, by the way, is not a cathedral. It was just simply the name of a bar. That minor character, Zabalita, you know, asked this question. I'll put it there in English because I don't want to create a problem, you know, in public relations. But you know that the question has in the original, when did Peru go wrong? And this is what a lot of observers of the evolution of Latin American countries, they ask. You know, I'll just say that in Spanish for the Spanish speakers. You know, the sentence is, ¿Cuándo se jodió el Perú? When, you know, Peru went wrong, okay? And in the question, you know, then comes, you know, that the consensus is that what it lacks is the four freedoms of integration. for a country, to deal with another. What Latin America lacks, it's actually the mobility of labor, let's not say people. I have always insisted, that when those criteria for integration, they list the mobility of workers. Actually, the aim of the original message was the mobility of people. And in that, comparing with the European experience, we immediately notice that in the Latin American experience, there is no Jean Monnet, no expert behind the project, We may mention that there were some people that they deserve that spot, like Raúl Previs, the economist, and actually that has been substituted since the very beginning by the Bolívar José Martí paradigm, the priest, the presidential figure, the national competition. And then in front, that attempt, to follow some sort of model, has been, the U.S. influence in the building of the country. So the thing is that a comparison of Europe and Latin America actually leads into this. Europe, we know that even today has many problems. Okay, but the model continues to be effective, or at least, a majority of the leadership believes so. So, in other words, still the influence of the soft power is still valid. Europe is unique, very, and by Europeans feel something in common. With the EU backing, then there are close regions, but in Latin America, but the low trade level. The result, then has been an uneven marriage. In Latin America, it's obvious. Natural affinity, historical, linguistic, religion, social customs, it's obvious. There are no major differences, languages, religion, etc. But the notion of Latin America or Latin American is only recognized outside. Do this simple test. You don't know someone, knowing that comes from the region, and ask that question, who are you? Very few would answer right away, I am a Latin American. They would answer right away, I am an Argentinian, I am a Mexican. Okay. So the major difference is simply that a central notion in European integration, the sharing of sovereignty is not understood because it is interpreted as a loss of sovereignty. And I'll explain to you, I'll share with you an anecdote, that I went through when I managed, to get into a meeting organized by the Organization of American States in Fort Lauderdale. As you know very well, Fort Lauderdale is in the United States. Miami is near the United States. And after crossing the border, I end up, attending a major event organized by the Organization of American States, in which, of course, the United States, was the host. And in order to attend that, you need to comply with certain efforts. Going back into the topic of soccer, for a long time, I ceased to attend World Cup meetings, championships, and I always end up, going to some stadiums, actually protected by a credential. And I said one day that I would only go to certain meetings, political or sports, if invited as a VIP or as a press. Since actually, it was mentioned in the introduction. I've been writing for the press, for ages. I always manage, to get a press credential that very well that it has been increasing in volume from the old times that it was just simply a sort of little business card. It's growing and growing until a point, that it covers most of your thorax anyway. But I managed, to do this. So I managed, to go to that big, important convention, and I got into the big room, and then went into a row that said, press, sit down. But then I realized, there were many rows in front, I'm still far, from the place, where President Bush was. But as I usually do when I see places that they are empty, and I try to go to them, something that my wife hates, say, why don't you stay where you are? Well, look, unless they stop me. So I go, then I managed to go, 10 rows, 20 rows, like in a football game, until at one point that I face, one sign, a place on the corridor that says, press pool only, press pool only, P-O-O-L. Again, if you don't tell my wife and you don't tell some of my students, I will confess to you that for a second and a half only, okay, I thought that I was in such a well-organized place and hotel that you also had a swimming pool reserved for the press. Okay, why I say this, and so on. It's very simple, because that word pool does not exist in Spanish. Does not exist in any of the Romance languages that I know. It's an absent concept. No similar word in Spanish anyway. It's probably the only good contribution of the English language, British, to the European Union. But it works, pool. Also, then I remember later on that is what I experienced in Washington, D.C. when I was studying at Georgetown and teaching at Johns Hopkins, that the whole town, was populated and run by a pool of secretaries, because at that time everything was working on papers anyway. So what are then the basic obstacles for the over-present president? The speed towards fast schemes, poverty and inequality, that without national integration, there is no regional integration, okay? No common management, no institutions. The substitute for that, would be the rush to symmetry, what in Spanish is called cumbritis. So in other words, that message of the founder of the European Union, Jean Monnet, you see that this is different. The message, the giving, to Robert Schuman for the declaration, the Schuman Declaration of 1945. And that sort of possible presence of that person could be found, in at least two prominent economic political figures of Latin America. The first one, Raúl Prebisch, the founder, an Argentine economist, the founder of the ECLA in Latin America. And the second one, this gentleman, Enrique Iglesias. Anytime I mention this gentleman in classes, I notice immediately that they are a bunch of ladies that they smile. And then I had to tell them, no, it is not Enrique Iglesias you think. This gentleman was also the head of the CEPAL, one of the first presidents of the Inter-American Development Bank, and later Secretary General of the Iberian Community. And it is mentioned, he's mentioned constantly as the frustration of his bio, in the sense that he could never be president of Uruguay. Okay, why? Because he was born in Asturias, and many Latin American countries, they have that same restriction for becoming president of the country as in the United States, in which you have to be native-born citizen anyway. So that was, so who still dominates that scene? The Bolivar paradigm, the Prócer, the priest that I use the name for my courses, the leader, you know, the model, the Simón Bolívar, the Libertador, you know, the person. So the presidential figure is actually there. And then that actually caused, you know, the national competition. And in that environment, then you find, you know, the influence of the other model, the United States. As a Mexican writer, Carlos Fuentes, said once, you know, you cannot pretend that the elephant doesn't exist in the zoo. You know, you always will find, you know, the United States, you know, with the overpresence of so what then in there we find, you know, the support of the European Union for the construction of a Latin American identity or Latin American institutions, the coast regions. But as I said before, then the problem is that the trade is low. So then the whole picture of the European Union with Latin America is tremendous. You're talking about 60 sovereign nations, more than 1 billion inhabitants, more than 1/4 of the world the world power. So the EU is important economic and political partner, is the leading donor in the region, is the first foreign investor, is the second trade partner. And the whole scene is populated, you know, by quite a large number of regional organizations. Most of them, but then when you go inside and you see the papers, you may find that, you know, this is familiar to me. You know, there are some of them that they have a bureaucratic structure very similar to the European Union. But what it appears, you know, on the surface, then when you go inside, you realize, you know, that is different, and the relations. You're talking about the structure of Mercosur. You're talking about the Andean community. Okay, you were talking about the Central America, which, by the way, the Central American region, SICA, actually has been recognized, you know, very recently by the European Union with an association agreement. And then newcomers like UNASUR, or all this, you know, this relationship from the European Union based on 3 pillars: economic cooperation, political dialogue, trade relations. And for over the years, that relationship, you know, has been supported by a series of biannual summits. Remember at the very beginning that I mentioned one of the ways, summits, you know, symmetry. Okay, everything is arranged, you know, in biannual meetings in Rio de Janeiro, Madrid, Guadalajara, Vienna, Lima, and so on. And by the way, recently, you know, the one that it was supposed to take place in El Salvador, actually they were alternated, you know, between European capital and Latin American capital. In El Salvador was suspended because the Latin American part actually went berserk over the issue of Venezuela. So that innate and cooperation of the European Union actually contributed to priority areas: social cohesion, regional integration, poverty reduction, programs to middle income countries, a permanent cooperation in the so on, and then towards goals, the goals of support of regional integration, increase business competitive in international market, and facilitate know-how transfer. So, but again, the comparative paradoxes are very, very, very clear. Europe has problems, but its model is alive, the soft power and so on. But one of the differences is the different origins of wars. Let's be clear, we are not proposing those schemes that that Latin America should go into a pattern of wars among themselves, you know, like in Europe for 2,000 years, you know. But the reality is this, that in Europe, you know, Europe has been populated by endemic clashes for 2,000 years, since the Roman Empire, for centuries, for different motivations, for religion, for dynasties, for nationalism. Okay, so that's, and if you compare this with Latin America, okay, actually the result is different. Also, for example, Latin America has some sort of undeserved picture of wars. The wars among Latin American states, you know, are precise and few. In Brazil, the independence, you know, is not anti-colonial. Peru, Chile, and Bolivia, loss of sea access. Brazil, Argentina, Uruguay. But yes, you know, we would say, you know, that one country that actually can claim to be victim of internal Latin American wars, you know, was Paraguay. And what from the outside, it's always mentioned, you know, the soccer wars in Central America, they were not caused, you know, by wars, but by uncontrolled migration. And let's remember that the wars with the leadership of Mexico, they were not Mexican wars, you know, but actually aggressions of the United States. The big difference is in the concept of integration. Common sovereignty, it is not understood, or at least it is not accepted or practiced. Is the perception that integration translates into a loss of sovereignty. You know, the thing about the press pool only, okay? And then the existence, the ideal existence of a virtuous triangle composed of a political will for integration, institutions, juridical structure, turns into a vicious triangle. Two basic obstacles then: the president, omnipresent and omnipotent. So in other words, steps towards, you know, a vast empty structure. There is no common administration, weak institutions. And that reminds us with that is that the second part of the, not the Schuman Declaration, but the declarations by John Monnet, was one taken out of the writings of a Swiss philosopher that said, you know, all is possible by the work of people, of mankind. But he noticed, but nothing is lasting without the institutions, because they are the pillars of civilization, okay? But Jean Monnet then was more precise, saying that those institutions should have two conditions: be independent and with a budget, because without independence and without sources to run the programs would be only simple bureaucracies. So the institution framework is what we notice that is still missing, not on paper, but in practice in the Latin American. So then the institution of a Council of the European Union, the European Commission, the Court of Justice, you know, and then is when we see, you know, that the evolution of those entities in Latin America, they vary, and the result are, for example, the Mercosur there's still an expectation and at the same time doubt. The Andean community, you know, we see the size reduction and internal problems. I remember one visit I did in the headquarters of the Andean community. The person that actually was officially the Secretary General told me, you know, Joaquin, you know, I can't do anything. Anything I try to do, you know, I need the direct permission of the member states. In Central America, small, diverse, you know, but has been rewarded comparatively by the European Union with an association agreement. The Caribbean is still insular and young, but you know, CARICOM has meant a lot of pressure. UNASUR, which was the alternative propelled, you know, by Brazil and Venezuela, is different. Some security purposes, you know, have disappeared, and it has become obsolete. ALBA, the organization organized, you know, by Hugo Chavez, based only on a political reaction, you know, against, you know, foreign powers, has been neutralized. And then what we have is still the survival of the United States model. The United States model as seen in the NAFTA and the old NAFTA and the new NAFTA, you know, and the disappearance of the most more ambitious FTA of the Americas, and then reduced, you know, to CAFTA. Problems that then we face: weakening of Mercosur. Let's put it this way: at least now, the damage caused, you know, by the membership of Venezuela has been reduced, but still, you know, with internal problems. One problem caused by the European Union is the survival of the common agricultural policy. Internal problems, poverty and inequality. Let's put it this way, okay? Let's be clear of this. You know, the level of poverty is very high in many regions in the world. But what Latin America actually shows is not only poverty, but inequality, the highest in the world. And that also, trends, you know, produce an allergy to deepening, you know, the resistance of the presidencies. What we see today in recent years, you know, is the rise of neo-populism, you know, because some conservative governments actually use the circumstances, you know, to actually propose themselves as the solution. And again, I'm going back into the US model. And again, without Brazil, you cannot have a decent, deep Latin American integration. So what happened some years ago, a couple of decades ago, is that in spite of the fact that the EU tried, you know, to sponsor, to pay, by the way. So you have the cases of the EU going into some special sub-regions and say, well, what it could be, you know, important, you know, is to build a court of justice. And then we were told, they were told, well, you see, we don't have the resources, you know, to build a court of justice. And Brussels would say, don't worry, we'll put the funds. Well, where can we put it? Because there are no spaces. Don't worry, you know, we'll buy the land and we'll put the court of justice there. So at one point, taking into account that the message, you know, was not received consistently, one interpretation of some currents of opinion of scholarship on this, you know, from Europe and from Latin America, is that the EU sort of threw the towel and opted for dealing with individual countries. As of today, for example, yes, the support of the European Union is maintained, you know, but not in the institutionalization sector, but only for programs. And today, then what we find on top of those difficulties is the competition from China. So what do we have? Options to deal with problems of integration. Options: inertia, simply go on. Tabula rasa, you know, the decision is that all this doesn't make any sense. Or the third one is actually what the European Union has been doing in recent decades, is learn from experience, learn from the mistakes. Okay, final. What about the model of the EU, or the point of reference? No matter what, we find that the model or the presence of the European Union is still present. Therefore, the best solution is to learn from available present solutions. A reform treaty, the European Union has been surviving, you know, with a reform treaty after another. There is no constitution, okay, so there is no rush. Slow process. A house reform before another enlargement. Conclusion is that there is no other reference model in the world, you know, for the Latin American experiments. And with this, I finished my basic sharing with you. I would appreciate your protests, your questions, your commentaries.
Great. Thank you so much. There is a lot of information contained, and I'm sure you can talk a whole semester long about it. I do have a couple questions that I want to ask you, but I'm going to put them aside for now because we have already at least 3 questions in the chat box. And once again, for everyone, actually more, 5 questions. So let me just start with the first one and pose it to you from Luis Hernandez. And he refers to the humanitarian aid that was sent by the Miami Cuban exile community to Cuba. And Josep Borrell, the EU's High Representative for Foreign Affairs Security Policy, argues that this humanitarian aid is a politicized measure coming from Miami. And it's not currently being held by the Cuban regime, not being released. So he wonders, what does this tell us? You know, this sort of spat between the Miami Cuban exile community, Josep Borrell. What does it tell us about the future of EU-Cuba relations?
Well, I don't know about that specific comment, you know, but the constant policy of the European Union before and during Borrell's administration is actually engagement, what is called productive engagement. In other words, instead of isolation, you know, is actually the engagement in the process, with the hope, and some people would say that that's wishful thinking in the future anyway, that the policy of the European Union has been actually based on future results, in order when the change of regime happens, Cuba is better prepared to deal with the rest of the world than before. That's the way this has not changed, you know, since the since the beginning of that relationship. It does not mean, you know, that the European Union does not, you know, take note that Cuba is not of the same political regime as the European Union. That's for sure.
Thank you. A question that relates to it, but is different. Sidney Hill asks, would you say that US interests are often at odds with EU interests in terms of improving Latin American integration? So a little bit about sort of these two power poles.
I would say that the main difference is that the bulk, what I would say, the ideology, if you wanted to use that word, of influence of the United States towards Latin America. It is not the priority. It is not for a solid, deep regional integration, institutionalized, you know, proposing, you know, a weakening of the you know, of the sovereignty of the central entities, but the opposite. And this is not, in other words, that clashes, with the proposal from Europe. In other words, the US proposal is more simply centralized on the trade, on traditional relations, and the notion of entities in the rest of the continent going beyond, the so-called trade is not present. That's why, the hopes that some people had, when the free trade area of the Americas, actually collapsed, was for that. This is the reason why the old NAFTA, then has been substituted for another one. And by the way, in other words, what you see in all entities in which the United States is present and is not a protagonist, the dimension stops, at the level of free trade. That famous expression attributed to President Truman, the bulk stops here, means the bulk stops in the border, between free trade and not going even to a customs union. And that is shared, by both political parties.
Great, thank you. So Ali Jackman and Sean Jacobs, two students of mine, they're asking questions related, I guess, has to do a lot, it's focused on Brazil in a way, but more generally, what do you think about to paraphrase Ali's question about the rise of populism in Latin America? And, she asks if there is a rise in populism in Brazil and elsewhere, would that populism possibly strengthen regional integration in Latin America? Or is it just pure nationalism who becomes competitive nationalism that you mentioned?
For a whole course. Traditional populism in Latin America actually was propelled, the one that, for example, we know as famous, like in Argentina, like in Mexico, and some other countries were propelled, by the protest, the claims of the downtrodden, los descamisados. So that actually propelled, that populism, from the bottom up. Okay, call it populism of the left. Okay, what actually has happened in more recent years, and now this is what we see, is actually call it neo-populism, but propelled, from the bottom, but from other sectors of the society, propelling people, leaders that in the old times, would be not from the downtrodden, and so on. What is, in both cases, what are some of the sources? Among them is the increased criminality. In other words, in the old times, and I don't want to call them the good old times. I remember myself, traveling in Latin America and avoiding, for example, special neighborhoods or regions that then the people that I was dealing with, the professors and the government officials, they don't go there. So you would be careful not to go into certain areas and so on. And you would see that the well-to-do, they were actually entrenched in neighborhoods, with walls and all this. Okay, now what you see is the downtrodden, the people from below, they have to fear the same criminality that before it was threatening, interest of the people at the top. So in other words, criminality then affects everybody. So then it is not surprising that then their leaders, populist leaders, coming from the traditional sectors and from the top. Is this very different? well, we see that around the world, we see the same phenomenon. In other words, the same phenomenon is that a distrust in many regions of the world, even in Europe, even in the United States, the distrust of traditional leadership. And if, for example, we can say that in the United States and in most countries in Europe, that's affordable, it is not affordable in Latin America.
Appreciate that. Good insight. Another question by Daniel Perez. He asked more specifically about Mercosur, and he asked what influence small states like Uruguay and Paraguay have against, the big giants, Brazil and Argentina. And maybe can you say something? I mean, my question was also with regards to Mercosur. There are some problems. You mentioned the problems between the EU and Latin America. And from what I know, there was European protest against Bolsonaro's, Amazon fires, right? So President Macron of France said he may stop the Mercosur trade negotiations. There was also fear by farmers, European farmers, or farmers of both sides about beef imports and exports.
Yeah, well, there are two dimensions here. One is the traditional endemic problems or shortcomings of Mercosur to be stabilized, because of the internal factors. All right, let's remember that Mercosur was founded, by the presidents of Argentina and Brazil, surviving after the military dictatorships. That's Alfonsín and Sarney in Brazil. And what they saw was, let's not compete for certain resources, because the result of that would be that the military may come back. So they found the magic formula of hydraulic energy. That's why they started building dams and so on. And it worked for a while. There is that strengthened, the reconstruction of democracy in both countries. And let's put it this way: Paraguay and Uruguay didn't have any other choice, by just going around, okay, and strengthening it. What then we could see, one of the sources of the slow progress. I mentioned that in my modest expose, is that the resistance of the institutionalization. In other words, the slow institutionalization of the process, okay? So to give power to those institutions. Remember that, for example, not until very recently, the members of the so-called Parliament of Mercosur were not elected by the people. They were representatives of the national parliaments. And never, not even now, the equivalent of the General Secretariat of Mercosur, that has an office in that beautiful building of Mercosur in Montevideo, an Art Deco building that I always, when I go back to Montevideo, I visit the Hotel Parque. Anyway, the problem has been that since the very beginning, the member states, the leaders, did not give the authority to that secretaries general and so on. If in the middle, then you see that insane idea of accepting Venezuela into that and so on. So then you have a perfect formula, for problems. Okay. Fortunately, apparently Venezuela has been neutralized and so on. But then you have the important issues of contrast, between the interest of the European Union, some member states of the European Union, and some Latin Americans. And you have the problems of competing for the same products, meat, etc. Or, for example, the complaints and of the certain members of the European Union for some products of Latin America. So that's, but yes, the thing is, you could say that still it's a miracle, that Mercosur still exists. But remember this is ironic. It is the only, well, there was the original Central America that actually was called, and that the name disappeared, the common market. But the name of Mercosur is the common market of the South, okay? Well, what is the assessment in nowadays? They have been talked for certain years about the fusion of Mercosur with that entity that is sort of vague, is the Alliance of the Pacific. In other words, the countries with shores on the Pacific, mainly Peru, change presidents, and now the president of Mexico doesn't want to do anything about the international relations. So what has been the talk for certain years about the fusion of Mercosur with the Alliance of the Pacific could, be the base of something. But
Great. Thank you. We have about 15 more minutes, but we have also a number of questions. Now let us switch to Europe. There are a couple of questions about Europe. So one is by Jean Rosenberg, who asks, what's the special role that Spain has in EU-Latin American relations? And then Stephanie Ashkenaz wants to know more internally, what do you think about the future of the populist Vox party in Spain? And let me just add on, Christina Schlesinska, she asks, outside of Spain, what other European countries are the most important trading partners for Latin America?
Yeah, you mean Vox?
Vox.
Pronunciation.
Yeah, right? Yeah, Vox. Sorry, Vox.
It's okay. It's okay. No, going back into the thing about Spain. Let's put it this way. Let's not kid ourselves. Okay, and this is something that in Latin America, most of the leaders historically, they understood that, and the common citizens. Spain without Latin America is very limited. Let's put it this way. So imagine, that what actually was the mistake of Christopher Columbus didn't exist. What Spain would be today, even less than Italy, okay? Or even less than a median state in Europe, anyway. So Latin America is an entity that is not important. It's essential for Latin America, and also then what it is actually the latent influence, that does not need government actions and so on, and it is the people. The presence of Spain in Latin America does not come, from political decisions or for investment, etc. It comes from the people. The reality is that after independence, more and more Spanish citizens migrated to Latin America, and most especially when the current the political circumstances. Take, for example, the jumping into the subject of one of the questions before, the case of Cuba. Why that insistence of the maintenance of that relationship? That's a lot of people in Europe and some places in Latin America, mostly in the United States, do not realize that. After the so-called Spanish-American War, okay, more citizens of Spain migrated to Cuba than before. This did not exist, did not happen in any of the other post-colonial imperial cases in Europe. Can you imagine what? After the end of the beginning of the Indian independence, more British citizens migrated to India. After the end of the French, even in Algeria. So this is a unique case. So that's why those people maintain, the force behind that relationship. Let's put it this way. It is true that in recent years, especially after the development or the recovery or the renaissance of democracy in Spain, Spain, the Spanish government and business and so on, they increased that activity that could, in some cases, in some concrete, clusters of years and so on, even could be considered as neo-imperialist. But what else they could do that? And the result of if you review the results of that relationship, you would not find many negative reactions. Okay, with the exception of what is now the trend of starting, making protests about the statues of Columbus and Hernán Cortés and conquistadors and so on. So it's both in regular societies in Latin America and in Spain, they're sort of laughing, because this doesn't lead anywhere. You recall that, for example, this is still pending that demand of the president of Mexico for Spain, not for Spain, for the king of Spain to present excuses for the conquest of Mexico. This is so totally ridiculous. Anyway, that at the end of the process doesn't make any sense, inside both the societies, because of that personal relationship and so on. For example, this is one of the reasons. I don't mean the only reason, but one of the most important reasons as to why Spain still, yes, putting pressure, yes, saying that this is unacceptable, yes, and so on, still, maintains that relationship with Venezuela, because Venezuela has been, that in more recent years after the Civil War and after, that actually received the largest number of Spanish immigrants to Latin America, surpassing the high levels of migration from Spain to some Latin American countries after the Civil War. So this is unstoppable. And in reverse, let's remember that as a result of the appearance of the Latin American military dictatorships in Latin America in the 1960s, 1970s, a tremendous amount of Latin American citizens actually went into exile, a lot of them to Spain. Okay, so you have many cases of what it primes is that personal relationship.
Thank you. So curious about what you thought about Vox. Remember?
Oh,
I remember there was a vote for confidence just recently that they lost.
Yeah, we'll see what happens. It's definitely it's the result of the occupation of a space that apparently has appeared in other European countries. That actually, among other reasons, then is because that space was not exploited by the traditional conservative party, the Popular Party. In other words, not even the most radical members of the Partido Popular actually went into that sector. And it looks like that is the result of what a lot of observers are saying are not the remains, the renaissance of sentiment that a lot of people thought that it was buried after many years after the Civil War. What observers, writers, many people studying the situation, now they are simply stressing, hey, what apparently happened, this is a thesis that I'm not proposing myself or not siding myself with one sector or another, but that's what a sector of political analysis are saying. This is the result of thinking that sort of deep Franquista ideology was dead. It is not dead. How will that survive? I really don't know. Would that be would that happen the same thing as, for example, in France? That who remembers the time, you know, that then observers in other countries of the world, they were predicting that the next president of France was going to be Le Pen, the daughter. What happened? Absolutely nothing. Now,
let's hope so.
Excuse me?
Let's hope so.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. For the next one.
Is what is this in the same sector? Sure, there are similarities with Germany, with Greece, with actually the ideology or attitude of the Polish government and the Hungarian government. So in other words, are we seeing the rise of sectors and ideas that actually went slowly and slowly coming up of Europe in the 1920s, and then, you know, took over many countries in the 1930s, and you know what happened after? I really don't know. Or
yeah.
Not that I hope not, but let me be more precise. Not with predictions, with actually happened. It's very significant. Markus, I don't want to turn into a typical professor, but possibly what is missing from that question is actually what just happened in Spain. The most recent, let me pause and say that in clear terms. The most recent political development in Spain, you know, has been the attempt of the Vox, okay, for the measure of
COVID, no?
Censure of the Spanish government. That you see in the parliamentary system, you present that. If you get the majority, the prime minister is out. Vox tried, thinking that the Popular Party would join. And the Popular Party, you know, went back into thinking, you know, that that would be their maybe death. So the Popular Party rejected that in very harsh words. What is going to be the result of that? I really don't know. What demonstrates, by the way, is that, let's put it this way, the majority of the Spanish society would support a civilized conservative party as the Partido Popular, but not Vox. But look, that country defies the analysis of a lot of people, and that includes me.
Okay, thank you. Since, you know, we have to slowly conclude, I would say let's pick one more question, if that's okay with you, focused more specifically on Argentina. So there has also been a change in government, and the previous president, Macri, he worked to have close relationships with the EU as Camila Zapata Canut. But with the new Peronist government in Argentina, there seems to be more distance between the EU and Argentina. What do you make out of the future, you know, of those bilateral relations?
When bilateral relations with
Argentina.
Yeah, well, within Argentina. Okay. Yeah. One of the latest, most recent analyses, and I follow my favorite Latin American country, by the way, and my favorite Latin American capital, Buenos Aires, through one of the two best newspapers. One is La Nación and then Clarín. I write in Clarín very often anyway. There was an analysis in Clarín that actually, went to the center of this. This is amazing. This is what is happening right now. Is that no, the Argentine government in a presidentialist country, the president doesn't want to preside. So, in other words, the Peronist government is not acting now as it was expected, from the Peronists and so on. So we'll have to wait. There is no question that then all depends about what the people are like in Chile, like in many other Latin American countries, are going to decide about the performance of those governments reacting on the coronavirus crisis. We still have to see the full results of what's going on. And what's going on? Actually, the figures are there. The levels of poverty, hyper poverty, are increasing by the hour. So this is going to have a tremendous effect. So how long some governments, trying to do sort of middle of the road policies are going to maintain that, I don't know. But there is no question that one candidate for possible radicalization is Argentina.
Mm-hmm. Great, fantastic, thank you. Yeah, we have basically we're out of time. There's still a few more questions. I had some questions, but I'm sure that you agree that I want to thank you first of all very much. And if there are some questions that maybe folks can contact you directly at the University of Miami by email.
Right.
Wonderful. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
We'll have other occasions.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you again so much. And if I can ask the audiovisual service just to please prepare our final slides. Yes, if you want to follow us, you can as well with the University of Miami's European Union Center or our joint Miami, Florida Jean Monnet Center of Excellence, miamieuc.fiu.edu, or you can also follow us on Facebook and Instagram. Thank you again, Dr. Roy, for the participation. Thanks everyone for coming. It was a true pleasure, and I hope we can do this again next year, right? There's always so much dynamism between these two regions.
Okay, sorry, I lost you. Okay.
Oh, yeah, thanks again for sharing your wealth of knowledge with us. And thanks everyone for participating. And I hope we can do this next year again, because there seems to be always so much dynamism in this relationship.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Take care. Take care, everyone.